Pilots undergo rigorous training to manage countless scenarios, relying on their preparation and established protocols to ensure the safety of passengers and crew on board. But what happens when relying on their training becomes a liability rather than an asset? We'll provide answers to that question and more in today's video, as we look at the events that led to the tragic incident of the FlyDubai 981. Join us as we explore whether the training meant to ensure safety can become a hindrance when the situation demands quick thinking and the ability to solve challenging problems on the spot. The FlyDubai Flight 981 incident in Rostov-on-Don, Russia, 2016, highlights how over-reliance on training and protocols can sometimes hinder a pilot's ability to adapt to unforeseen situations. FlyDubai scheduled one of its Boeing 737-800s to operate Flight 981 on the 18th of March 2016, a regular passenger flight from Dubai to the city of Rostov-on-Don in southern Russia. Around 8:45 p.m., a flight crew of 2 pilots and 5 cabin crew members arrived at Dubai Airport's FlyDubai crew room to begin preparations for the night shift. FlyDubai scheduled the Boeing 737-800 to operate on 2 routes, beginning in Dubai, United Arab Emirates, where they would fly to the Russian Federation city of Rostov-on-Don, from where they would return to Dubai. The scheduled departure time was 9:45 p.m. Dubai time, and they would then land around 4 hours and 35 minutes later. Preparing for their flight, FlyDubai 981 pilots reviewed briefing materials, revealing adverse weather in Rostov-on-Don with strong winds, rain, and potential thunderstorms. FlyDubai had issued special briefs to their crews before flying into the Russian Federation. This is because they would sometimes have to fly in meters instead of feet, and Rostov-on-Don complexities included wind shears and a shallow ILS glide slope, designating it a captain's-only airport for landings and takeoffs. The captain was 37-year-old Aristos Socrates, with a total flying experience of approximately 6,000 hours. FlyDubai promoted Socrates to captain a year and a half before the crash. He intended to quit FlyDubai after accepting a job with Ryanair that would allow him to stay with his family in Cyprus. Flight 981 was one of his last flights with the airline. He had flown 4,782 hours on the Boeing 737, but he had only just over 1,000 hours of command experience on it. The first officer was 36-year-old Alejandro Cruz Oliva from Spain, who had more than 5,700 hours of flying time, with 1,100 on the Boeing 737. Before joining FlyDubai in 2013, he had worked for 2 regional airlines in the Spanish Canary Islands. Flight 981 was the pilot's first flight to Rostov. The captain had previously flown into other Russian airports, but the first officer did not. Nevertheless, the pilots finished their pre-flight checks, briefed the cabin crew, and boarded the lightly loaded aircraft carrying 55 passengers. As they prepared for takeoff, the pilots decided that the first officer would fly for the first leg, and as they approached their destination, the captain would take over to perform the landing as mandated by the airport brief. At 10:20 p.m. local time, FlyDubai Flight 981 departed Dubai International Airport more than half an hour behind schedule. The pilots received weather reports from their destination while they were en route. Rostov-on-Don was experiencing a storm that brought with it strong winds and rain, but they had prepared by accumulating extra fuel in Dubai due to the higher fuel costs in Rostov-on-Don, which provided them with a substantial buffer in case they needed to hold or attempt multiple approaches. The flight proceeded smoothly and encountered no significant issues during its cruise phase. And an hour before their descent, the crew switched the autopilot from the right side to the left side of the pilot, currently flying the aircraft. Flight 981 started to descend toward the airport at 1:17 a.m. local time. The controller advised them they would land into a 40 kph headwind with gusts up to 54 kph due to the poor weather conditions. They also mentioned wind shear in weather reports. Wind shear is a sudden change in wind direction and speed over a short distance, and it can pose a serious threat to airplanes. The pilots decided to use the wind shear avoidance maneuver to go around if the wind shear alarm went off. Safety procedures mandate pilots to retract the flaps to 15 degrees, accelerate the engines to climb thrust, raise the landing gear, and abort the approach to perform a regular go-around, which involves climbing out and rejoining the holding pattern. On the other hand, the wind shear avoidance maneuver requires swift execution to enable the pilots to maintain the gear down position and the flaps extended while utilizing maximum engine power to offset the resulting drag. As Flight 981 descended to 1,100 feet above the ground at 1:42 a.m., a predictive wind shear warning sounded. Go around, wind shear ahead. The crew had undergone extensive training and preparation to manage situations such as this effectively, and they began the wind shear avoidance maneuver as soon as the alarm went off. With its flaps extended, Flight 981 quickly climbed above the maximum permitted airspeed. Nevertheless, everything else about the go-around went according to plan, and the pilots leveled off at 8,000 feet, well above wind shear. Captain Socrates decided to delay further landing attempts until they could gather more information about the approach conditions from an incoming Aeroflot Sukhoi Superjet 100. First, Officer Alava requested a holding pattern near the airport to monitor the situation until the SSJ-100 landed or diverted. At 1:53, the Aeroflot SSJ-100 reported wind shear on the final approach and aborted the landing. With no flight successfully landing in Rostov-on-Don for quite some time, Alava grew increasingly concerned about the weather conditions. He discussed this with a flight attendant after Socrates left the cockpit for the bathroom. Alava mentioned that all other aircraft had left and were the only ones attempting to land in the challenging weather conditions. He further questioned the logic behind the airline scheduling flights to this destination at night, given the poor weather conditions prevalent during the day. However, he did not explicitly convey his concerns to the captain upon his return. As the storm swept across the range, Socrates made several adjustments to their holding pattern to avoid the severe weather conditions. At 2:06 a.m., the Aeroflot SSJ-100 aborted another approach due to wind shear. Although First Officer Alava preferred to divert the flight, Captain Socrates insisted on waiting for improved conditions. At 2:16, the Aeroflot SSJ-100 aborted a third landing attempt because of wind shear. Its pilots ultimately decided to ditch landing at Rostov-on-Don and diverted the flight to Krasnodar. As a result of this, Socrates devised a two-part plan to address the situation. First, they would maintain a holding pattern for a maximum of 2 hours or until weather conditions improved, whichever came first. Secondly, they would make one final landing attempt upon completing the holding pattern. If the landing were unsuccessful, they'd divert the flight to their alternate airport in Volgograd, where weather conditions were notably better. Socrates based his decision on several factors that were entirely reasonable. Diverting the flight to Volgograd would require arranging passenger accommodations at an additional cost to the airline, and it would disrupt FlyDubai's flight schedules compared to a 2-hour holding pattern followed by a successful landing in Rostov. Additionally, the crew could still perform the return flight to Dubai without exceeding duty time limits, which wouldn't be possible if they diverted. Socrates called the airline dispatcher and engaged in a long conversation. The dispatcher proposed changing their alternate destination from Volgograd to the tourist town of Mineralny Vody. Encouraging the crew to hold as long as necessary, the dispatcher urged them to make every effort to land in Rostov. Following an in-depth analysis of approach strategies and weather conditions, both pilots agreed to designate Mineralny Vody as their new backup airport. Additionally, they briefed on handling a potential wind shear encounter during the approach, using the same wind shear avoidance procedure in their earlier attempt. At 3:20 a.m., the pilots initiated their second and final approach despite ground-level winds exceeding 50 kph. The controller's report stating no wind shear on the runway influenced their decision. However, the controller meant that no one had reported wind shear due to a lack of landings or takeoffs at Rostov-on-Don for several hours. This miscommunication occurred due to the controller's poor English proficiency, which may have led the pilots to believe that the weather conditions were more favorable than they really were. As Flight 981 descended through turbulence and icing conditions, the controller reported a low-altitude headwind of nearly 100 kph. Fearing severe wind shear, the pilots communicated to the controller what they would do if they encountered it. At 1,100 feet, a strong gust of wind hit the aircraft head-on, resulting in an indicated airspeed that far exceeded the maximum limit for a stabilized approach, according to standard operating procedures. Observing the deviation, First Officer Alava alerted Captain Socrates, "Check the speed." In response to the unstable approach, Captain Socrates acknowledged the situation and initiated a go-around, calling, "Okay, go around." The pilots faced a critical situation as they were now required to abort the landing. Contrary to their anticipation of wind shear, the go-around resulted from an unstable approach. This distinction would ultimately set the stage for the events that followed. The unexpected go-around for reasons other than wind shear caught Captain Socrates off guard, as he had mentally prepared for a wind shear avoidance maneuver. This led him to accelerate to maximum thrust, as if executing the wind shear maneuver. However, First Officer Alava had configured the aircraft for a standard go-around procedure by retracting the flaps to 15 degrees and raising the landing gear. Without the drag from the flaps and gear, using maximum thrust was excessive, especially considering the half-empty plane with low fuel. Consequently, the aircraft began climbing more steeply and rapidly than anticipated. To achieve the desired pitch angle of 15 degrees nose up, Socrates applied significant forward pressure to his control column, which created an out-of-trim situation. An out-of-trim situation refers to a condition where the aerodynamic forces acting on the control surfaces of an aircraft cause a tendency to move away from the desired position, and the pilot must apply continuous pressure on the controls to counteract this effect. Trim tabs or adjustable stabilizers are typically used to correct an out-of-trim condition, allowing the aircraft to maintain the desired attitude without constant control input. Light aircraft like the one on which Socrates first learned to fly have trim tabs instead of stabilizer trim. The aircraft designers have attached the trim tab to the elevator's trailing edge, allowing adjustments to help maintain the elevators in a specific position, to help hold the elevators in a particular position. When the trim tab and elevator positions align, the feedback force on the control column becomes neutral. Pilots can hold the yoke in position and fine-tune the trim tab until they achieve a balanced state. On the other hand, the Boeing 737 incorporates an adjustable horizontal stabilizer capable of being maneuvered upward or downward to achieve proper trimming of the aircraft, adjusting its neutral pitch angle toward either nose up or nose down. It uses a feel and centering unit to generate artificial feedback force on the control column. The unit reacts only to elevator inputs from the yoke, not stabilizer trim adjustments. Since the stabilizer trim doesn't affect the elevator's position, it doesn't change the feedback force. The pilot must gradually ease the control column to neutral while adjusting the trim to the desired setting to maintain the pitch angle and reduce the required control column force. Failure to do so will compound input without reducing feedback force. This is a major distinction between the light aircraft and the 737, which proved decisive in the next sequence of events. During the go-around, the stabilizer trim automatically changed to a nose-up position to help maintain a stable climb. When Captain Socrates pushed the nose down using his control column, the elevators moved in the opposite direction of the stabilizer, causing an out-of-trim situation. Maintaining a 15-degree nose-up attitude became challenging under these conditions, resulting in significant fluctuations in the plane's pitch. First Officer Alava warned him, "Keep it to 15 degrees, nose up." But when Socrates let off the pressure on the yoke, the pitch jumped to 18.5 degrees, which was too high. Captain Socrates abruptly flipped the two trim switches on his yoke, moving the stabilizer trim toward nose down. He held the switches for 12 seconds, pushing the stabilizer beyond neutral into an extreme nose-down position. The plane violently pitched down, hurling unsecured objects and people into the ceiling. Most likely, Socrates instinctively relied on his experience flying light aircraft when attempting to reduce the feedback pressure on his control column. Believing he could alleviate this pressure by aligning the trim with his elevator input, he added nose-down stabilizer using the trim switches. However, this adjustment failed to yield results due to the absence of connectivity between the trim and the control column feedback force. This may explain why he held the trim switches down for 12 seconds, resulting in the plane entering a fatal nosedive. "Be careful!" Alava screamed repeatedly. Socrates muttered, "Oh shit!" Alava continued to shout, "No, no, 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 don't. Don't do that." After Socrates released the trim switches, the 737 had pitched to 40 degrees nose down and entered a high-speed dive. The plane rapidly accelerated toward the ground at maximum thrust, yet Captain Socrates continued pushing his control column forward for some reason. "No! Pull it! Pull it!" Alava yelled desperately. "Pull it! My God!" Finally, Alava grabbed his control column, attempting to pull out of the dive with all his strength. Instead of pulling back, Socrates rolled the plane 60 degrees to the left as the ground proximity warning system urged, "Pull up! Pull up!" At that point, it was too late. The fatal chain of events had already progressed beyond redemption. The last sounds captured on the cockpit voice recorder were the pilot's terrified screams as the plane ran out of altitude. FlyDubai Flight 981 plunged nose-first into the runway in a steep left bank, exceeding 600 kph, completely demolishing the aircraft. An immense fireball erupted over Rostov-on-Don as the fuel ignited. The plane carved a meter-deep hole through the pavement, and debris from the aircraft and its passengers dispersed widely across the area, resulting in a catastrophic scene. Fire crews responded to the explosion, but met an unrecognizable scene, making it clear that none of the 62 people on board had survived the tragic crash. Investigators explored the possibility of spatial disorientation, precisely a somatographic illusion, causing Captain Socrates to mistakenly nosedive. When pilots lack visual references, they may misinterpret acceleration as a nose-high pitch, leading to an initiation of a dive to prevent a perceived stall. However, further analysis revealed the somatographic illusion window had passed before the dive. Captain Socrates had experienced subtle incapacitation when the unexpected go-around circumstances disrupted his planned path. Focusing intensely on achieving the correct pitch angle, he lost awareness of his input's effects on the aircraft. Instead of stabilizing with nose-down trim, he pushed the control column forward, worsening the situation and contributing to the fatal dive. Captain Socrates was likely unaware of the differences in the feedback mechanism between light aircraft and the Boeing 737, and his state of mind prevented him from comprehending the dangerous implications of his trim input. A timely pull-up may have saved the flight. However, Captain Socrates' mental incapacitation hindered his reaction to the extreme maneuvers. The rapidly worsening situation, compounded by sudden zero-gravity conditions inducing disorientation, dust, and difficulty seeing and breathing, likely caused his subtle incapacitation. Although Socrates was conscious and aware, he could not take decisive action. The cockpit voice recording revealed First Officer Alava understood what was happening, but his late physical intervention proved futile in preventing the crash. Both pilots' apparent competence and preparedness throughout FlyDubai Flight 981 made the loss of control and subsequent crash more bewildering. Despite demonstrating caution and adherence to procedures, the combination of circadian lows, unfamiliar territory, and volatile weather conditions contributed to a high base level of risk. Had the pilots considered these factors, a different outcome may have been possible. Investigators from the Interstate Aviation Committee, IAC, made 26 detailed recommendations in their final report, focusing on crew training for upset recovery and enhancing pilots' understanding of aircraft trim systems. Regulatory authorities have incorporated these recommendations into initial and recurrent upset prevention and recovery training (UPRT) programs for all pilots. Additionally, the report scrutinized English proficiency among Russian controllers and examined the design and usage of head-up displays to improve overall aviation safety. The tragedy of the FlyDubai Flight 981 emphasizes the importance of situational awareness and adaptability in aviation. Thus, maintaining a balance between procedural discipline and dynamic decision-making is essential for ensuring the safety of passengers and crew. It is a stark reminder that even competent and well-prepared pilots should never underestimate the challenges of unforeseen circumstances. Thanks for sticking with this video till the very end. If you enjoyed this video and wish to see more of such videos, please subscribe to this channel. Also, remember to like and share this video content. Thanks again for watching.